Hi, Hotch. This is Henry speaking.
Who's this?
This is Henry. Henry
Henry
Schvey.
himself. I'm glad to talk to you, Henry. Nothing else is working.
No, exactly. Everybody else is fading out on us. But first of all, I wanted to, on behalf, we have a huge crowd here, full house. You will appreciate that in the library, and wanted to wish you a very, very happy birthday.
But nobody is to sing happy birthday.
Wait a minute. They're all set here. Okay, all right.
That is one of the no-nos of my life.
All right. Okay. No happy birthday song then. Okay. I cancel.
Let me tell you about the library. When I first came to Washington University from Soldan High School, I got in on a scholarship, but there was no money for books or anything else. But a kind gentleman named Franklin Roosevelt passed a law called Youth Administration, and it paid $15 a month to deserving students in universities. And I got my $15, and I was assigned to work in Olin Library.
Oh my goodness.
And it kept me going for all of the first part, the 3 years that I was at Washington, pre-law. And then when I went to law school, I worked in the library there. When I say worked, it really wasn't much work. I was a star because the library contained a lot of case histories, and some of the case histories had to do with very strange sexual matters. And so I was very popular with first-year law students who came to see this guy on the library floor, and referral on my part of those cases. So for a long time I was there, and then I think toward the end of my law school time I got some kind of another job. So I'm very familiar with the library system and indebted to it, especially to Olin, because believe it or not, that it was a depression then, and the $15 financed buying books and lunch. And I owe to the library not just this occasion, but that occasion, way back when my love of books began.
That's truly amazing. And now this year another book comes out, another A.E. Hotchner book appears on our shelves. It's really incredible, the kind of career you've had combining literature and philanthropy. And I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about Aaron Broom. But one thing I'd like to note for the public also, because the book is just coming out now, is the dedication which you make, which I think in some ways synthesizes your interests in both literature and philanthropy. I dedicate this book and the indomitable spirit of Aaron Broom to the brave children of the Hole in the Wall gang camp. And everybody that knows you knows that you, together with Paul Newman, started a string of these camps for children with life-threatening diseases, and that's been a huge part of your life. Would you like to say a few words about what that's meant to you, and before we get into talking about your literary achievements?
The fact of the matter is, I really owe all of that to one bottle of salad dressing. Paul called me one day. We had already done a few things on television. I wrote them and he performed them. But he said, come on over, I've got an idea. And he had this salad dressing that he was very proud of. He had a bunch of old wine bottles, and he wanted to bottle them up and give them out on Christmas Eve. That one bottle turned into a desire on his part to sell them in food stores. And I said, you can't do that because you haven't got the right licenses. But with that one bottle, we made many bottles, and we made it a funny little company that became a funny medium-sized company, and then a big company, and with the money of that, we were able to found a camp for kids who had cancer. And I must say that that has been a great experience in my life, because those camps now are all over our country, Canada, Africa, the world, and thriving. I have grown up Italian citizens come to me and say, when I was a boy, I was in your camp in Bologna. So literature begot many things. And this book that has just come out, I want to tell you about it. When I turned 100 and got some kind of plaudits, as if reaching 100 was my doing. And at that time, I remember telling my family, now I'm not going to really bring down the curtain and sit around playing parcheesi or whatever the game is. Between now and 101, I'm going to write a book that I've been toying with and dedicated to St. Louis and to my boyhood. But I'm going to make a novel out of it. I'm going to make a murder mystery out of it. But at the heart of it, it's my boyhood put into a different framework. But everything in that book has to do with the St. Louis I knew and loved, and the people. I've disguised them a bit, but I think that any St. Louis that reading it now will find so much that survived from the time of the Depression and metamorphosed into some other form. And that's why at 101, I am really very pleased that there's going to be a book that will be available not just to St. Louisans, but to everyone to know about St. Louis.
First of all, I think turning 100 or 101 is an achievement, and you do bear some of the responsibility and the credit for it. I noticed in the book, which is, by the way, a wonderful read, and I think everybody will absolutely marvel at it and enjoy it. And it will remind you also of Hotch's terrific memoir, King of the Hill, which treats of the same milieu in St. Louis during the Depression. It's an incredible read, really is an incredible read. But I noticed the date, June 28th, occurs prominently in the first chapters of this book. So you were thinking in terms of this book being done at this stage in your life. It's to say it's an incredible achievement is a vast understatement, and I think that, I mean, to me, you have been a kind of personal role model and hero. And I don't mean only in terms of the fact of how much you have accomplished, how much you have written. In so many genres, you've tackled every genre from original plays to novels to essays, to adaptations, to memoir, but also your sense of generosity and giving. And people will not realize that how hard I had to twist your arm to get you to lend your name to the Hotchner studio, which you weren't really in a hurry to do. So it's something that we are very thankful for, and also that impacts our students every day. Every day there are students who work in that studio, who write plays for that competition. We benefit in so many ways from all your generosity. Can we go back a little bit to some of your other work? And of course, we haven't even mentioned Ernest Hemingway, and perhaps your most famous book is Papa Hemingway. Can you tell us a little bit about how Hemingway figured in your early years and your life?
Well, in a sense, I'd have to say dramatically that Hemingway made my life. It was just a kind of a fluke that I got a job on a magazine, Cosmopolitan. It was a literary magazine then, till it was defamed by Helen Gurley Brown. But the only job he had for me was that I go around and see writers who had written for Cosmopolitan, like Steinbeck and others, and Hemingway was one of them, and Dorothy Parker. And if I could get them to write something to the magazine, that I would be paid for that. So I became a literary bounty hunter. And in the process, I tried to avoid having to go to Havana to see Hemingway and tried to convince him to write an article on the future of literature. I thought, what a horse's ass that I beat. I mean, he's not going to write an article on the future of literature, but I went down because of what I needed to say in New York at that time, because I wanted to be a writer. But to my amazement, Hemingway did not write anything on the future of literature, but he became very receptive to my being there. And he did eventually write something that ran in the magazine, and that was a novel called Across the River and Into the Trees.
Amazing.
It did not explode across the world as a literary masterpiece, but that's how we met. And for some reason, he needed a young man in his life whom he could treat as a son. His own sons were sort of separated from him, and that's how the relationship was. Father and son, really. And then, as it is with all families, when his Hemingway ethos began to decline, and he began to have problems with the Hemingway he was, I had to assume the son role and try to take care of him, knowing that toward the end there was no way to stop his own destruction. And I wrote a book about that very recently, Hemingway and Love. And I'm very proud of that book because it's just a recording, really, of my memory of the last time that we spent together, when he really was bemoaning the loss of his first wife, Hadley, who was the only woman he ever loved, and he let her go And that's really the kind of sad, but I think uplifting message of that book.
That's remarkable, Hotch. It's a beautiful, beautiful narration of that. People here, of course, know about your connection with Paul Newman, and it's another subject that you've written about, Paul and me. But I don't know how many of them know about how you first met, and about the Battler. I think that might be an interesting thing to remind people of too, because your friendship with Paul goes went way back.
Yeah, it goes back to let's see, to a program called Playwrights 56. And the producer of that program got hold of Hemingway on the telephone. He was outside of Havana where he lived. And Paul called me and said, not Paul, Papa called me and said, look, I'm being beleaguered down here by people on television and movies. Would you take the phone calls for me? And anything that sounds decent, let me know. As a result of the call by the producer of Playwrights 56, I recommended to this person, Fred Coe, who was well known, that there was a short story that nobody had done. All of the really good short stories had already been turned into movies and whatnot. And it was The Battler, which was a very short story. It was about, 8 pages long. Certainly not an hour of live television, and a very difficult assignment. But I felt I would recommend that to Papa, and he said, yeah, they can do that. It's a great story, but I wouldn't trust anybody with it but you. And I said, I've never written for television. I have no experience, and this is a very difficult thing. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, you take it on, and you do it, and then you will have had experience. And as a result of that, I got into that form of writing, theater writing. It led to other things. It led to full-length plays on Broadway and whatnot. But that was to be directed by a very well-known director named Arthur Penn. And they lauded the script that I did, and I was very amazed and very flattered by that. And they even had great casting. But the movie star who was cast for the lead of this is live television now, was killed in a sports car accident. And there was no lead, and they were about 3 or 4 weeks away from the production. And they couldn't get any other star on short notice. So Arthur Penn said, I work at the Actors Studio, and there's a young man in the cast in a small role. I think he could do this. His name is Paul Newman. So they got hold of Paul and said, listen, instead of having played this small part, we're going to put you in the lead. And he said, oh, no, you're not. I can't. This is very difficult. I'm not ready to perform a role like this. And somehow, over a dozen beers, I convinced him he was ready. And that was his first starring role. It was live television. It was the beginning of his career, and it was the beginning of my career as a playwright.
I think the audience would be interested also, especially those Hollywood buffs in the audience, would be interested in finding out who Paul Newman replaced.
Well, the great heartthrob of the time.
Somebody's already mentioned it in the audience. Actually, James Dean was the original.
Right. James Dean was sent for it, and Newman became the replacement of Dean. Actually, in the casting, it went on afterwards, because as a result of The Battler, he was cast in the role of Somebody Up There Likes Me, which is a boxing movie, in which he scored big, and that began his movie career.
It's an incredible story. It's also the idea of Paul Newman, so physically beautiful, being cast as the lead character in The Battler, who is a basically disfigured and punch-drunk prize fighter.
That's right.
Can you ask him to turn around?
Oh, Hotch, I'm sorry. I'm being told that we have the Skype on now. The Skype is working now. If you just turn around, we'll be able to see you.
Well, no, I'm not going to do that. Then everybody will leave.
No. A few will stick around.
No, I can be some kind of a movie star. I'm just a voice.
You're looking great. You look terrific.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't see myself, which is a great thing. But let me see what I see. Just a second. I'm going to get out of this chair and go into another one.
Is the video on Skype working? Or the audio?
I'm not sure about the audio.
Is it time for me to go into my anti-technology spiel? Because I'm ready. I'm really ready to go. Things are going along just great. We can't hear you, Hotch. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, with the phone.
Well, I don't know what. It's still on.
It's still on.
Oh, the phone is on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
No, don't hang up.
He just hung up. Where is he now?
He's at home.
Is that here in St. Louis?
No. He lives. Hotch lives in Westport, Connecticut.
Okay.
Okay, well, we lost him. So here we are.
We're back with
Anybody left?
There are a couple of stragglers, and I'm grabbing onto them so that they can stay. Of course, everybody's here. Everybody's here.
Just say that there'll be a drawing of a certain amount of money for those who stay.
Exactly. All right. Well, somebody's going to stay. No, it's fascinating to hear about this work and about all that you've done, and I mean, people. There are so many literary stories connected with your life. We've touched on Paul Newman. We've touched on Papa Hemingway. But many people here wouldn't realize that you also knew, say, J.D. Salinger, whom nobody knew.
We were both impoverished beginners living in Greenwich Village and trying to write. I think we had a weekly poker game for nickels. That was a, and there was a lid on what you could, pony up. At any rate, afterwards I would often have a beer with Salinger, who thought that he was maybe the only ballad writer in the world. He had great belief in his own merits and his own doing, but he didn't have much to show for it. And I had some lowly job at that time, and I don't know. Maybe I was so cosmopolitan, I don't know. But Salinger and I had many beer after many a poker game, and neither of us could play worth a damn. We lost our nickels. But he was arrogant. He was funny, and he was a real help for me to believe in the fact that the things I wrote would work. He had absolute belief that everything that he wrote would someday find its way into the world's light. And of course he was right. Well, I think I somehow got on the Collier's, or knew somebody on Collier's, and he wrote a short story. I guess I was on the magazine in some capacity at that time. At any rate, he wrote a short story about an experience he had in the war, and gave it to me, and I thought it was a wonderful short story, Soldiers in the War. And I told him so, and he said, well, tell Collier's they can have it if they want it at their usual price, plus whatever, because he believed mightily in the power of his contributions. But he said there's one caveat, that is, they cannot change a word of this story, because I know what they do to things that they take. So that was the deal. They bought the story. That was his first purchase story. And he gave me credit. And then the magazine came out. The story was intact. But the title of the story, its one banner across the page was a scratchy needle on a phonograph record. That's what the story title should have been, but they changed it to something like Trouble on the Autobahn or something. And he was furious. He said, I trusted you, and they changed it. I said, well, that's the title. You didn't say that. You said the story. And he never spoke to me again.
That's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about how it was to start writing King of the Hill? That's a book that I think is hopefully familiar to a lot of people here. And it's an autobiographical memoir about growing up in St. Louis. And it's a very painful story to read, despite its many riches and the humor, but it must have been very difficult for you to write.
Well, I worried about the effect on myself writing about it, because it was indeed a painful time in which I had to live alone. And live in fear, real fear, of losing a hotel room when both my mother and my father and my brother were off and I was alone because of circumstances. I didn't feel that I was ready to write that story until, funnily enough, later on, I had gone to Paris to I guess I made some money doing a couple of adaptations of Hemingway's stories, enough money to live in Paris. And in Paris, in a rented place on the Avenue Victor Hugo, it suddenly felt time, as I guess it feels time for a woman when her water breaks. My literary water broke, and I thought, I've got to write this story here in Paris, looking back on the boy I was in St. Louis way back then. And I started to write it in that flat in Paris. And it came back luminous. Everything came back, as it does today. I mean, my recall in the book that you now have there in the library,
Yes.
The Amazing Adventures of Aaron Broom, that all came back, and that is a memory of St. Louis in 1933. And everything in that book is a valid recall. And I guess the Aaron of the book is me that I put into a fictional setting,
Yes.
but in St. Louis, and one of which, again, I'm in peril. But unlike King of the Hill, which is a family in peril and a boy left out, this is a murder mystery. And the father of the boy in the book has been held as a material witness in a killing that he had nothing to do with. And it allows me to revisit the places and the times. And one of the main areas that recurs in the book is the Eads Bridge, the access to the Eads Bridge, which was Hooverville, and I was taken with the Eads Bridge because when I was in third or fourth grade in St. Louis, Lindbergh had flown the ocean, and the accolades for him and the spirit of St. Louis were booming all over the world. And on the particular day of my memory, all of us in the school system, all the thousands of children of St. Louis were issued little cardboard streetcars on which we wrote our names and our schools, and they had a little loopy string on them, and you had to tie them around your wrist. And we were all put on streetcars, like the cardboard ones that we were given, and taken down to the Mississippi, to the Eads Bridge. And Lindbergh appeared with the spirit of St. Louis and flew over all of us, thousands of school children.
Amazing.
Once, then he circled down and flew under the Eaves Bridge with the wheels dripping water and came back over, wiggled his wings and left, and it left an impression on me that will never leave. So I suppose that's really part of why I wanted to revisit and write this book that you now have there.
That's incredible. What a story. I don't know if we have time, and if you have if you're willing to take a couple of questions from the audience.
Sure. Anytime a St. Louis wants to talk to me, I'm ready.
All right. I think there are one or two people who have stayed around, Hotch. So can I open this to questions? Yes.
I'm curious if Forest Park plays into any of his creative process.
I'm going to repeat the questions because it's just so that you know. The question is, did Forest Park play into your creative process in any of your writings?
Say it again.
Whether Forest Park played into the creative work. Does it appear does Forest Park appear in your works?
Somehow I'm not getting this from you. Say it again slowly.
Sure. The question is, Forest Park does Forest Park appear in any of the work?
Yeah, well, Forest Park was really the rescue. And I do the rescue with a capital R because living in a Westgate hotel in one lousy room, all of us cramped together, I could walk to Forest Park and spread my wings.
Yes.
So, in this book, Forest Park plays a big part. I actually go to spend the nights there. I actually have a friend that had a friend at the park that runs the tennis courts, and he befriends me. Yeah, I use Forest Park extensively in the current book. And in other things I've written about, Forest Park is the juiciest memory of my life as far as getting through bad times.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much. Other questions? Yes.
I'm wondering why half of the references to Hotchner give his birthday is 1920 and the other half is 1917. Is there a mix-up there?
The question was about the date of your birth, whether it was 1920 or 1917.
Well, what happened was, of course, the actual date is 17, but at some point, for some reason, I wanted to make myself a few years younger. So I thought, what the hell, just check up. So, and also it's a lot easier to write 1920.
It's a good year. Absolutely. Makes sense.
But to make it really confusing is that somehow my first passport had 1917 on it. But when the passport had to be reissued, it became 1919. So I now have 3 birthdays, 19 and 20. And I don't think I'll change it anymore.
Okay. You've settled on one. That's good. Excellent. Yes, other questions?
It sounds like beer might have helped contribute to his long life, and I wonder if he recommends a certain kind.
The question is, the comment is that beer may have contributed to your longevity, and do you recommend any certain kind?
I think, first of all, I have a basic quality of not being very receptive to criticism. So I learned from it, but then resented the fact that I had to admit to myself the failings that I got over. And it made a funny kind of a blip in my personality. And it attracted a certain friendships, certain kind of friendships that have the same personality. So it's very strange, the circle of friends that I had as I grew up. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
You made it much more interesting than the question. Because the question was, I think, the question was that you like different varieties of beer, brews. And did you have, I think my voice may have allowed you to mistake beer for fear. But is there a special beer that you like? B-E-E-R.
You know, Newman was really a detractor. We had so many good beers, and all he stuck with was Budweiser.
There's one of the letters.
I'll tell you a funny beer story. So there was, after we really got our company, Newman's going, and it was giving away millions of dollars a year. I think we're at the $500 million mark now in what we've given away. And anyway, there was a beer company in the neighboring town of Norwalk Beer Company. And Paul liked it. It was about as interesting as Budweiser, which means not very. And I mean, compared to some of the, anyway, he said, Hotch, let's buy the beer company. It was a little wobbly. And he said, you know, I'll drink it here, there, and everywhere. And a lot of people will drink it because they like to drink what movie stars drink. So I said, well, that's fine. So we went over, and he said, you can be the beer master, and I'll be the beer drinker. It was all set until Joanne Woodward, his wife, discovered that the two of us were about to buy a beer company. And she said, you know, you two guys have gotten into so much trouble. You're now into spaghetti sauce and everything. She said, I don't think you should be bringing a beer into the canopy of your company. Paul, who listened all the time to his wife and did what he liked, he said, well, you know, I mean, we need to have a little fun. And we're not very dignified or reputable characters anyway, so why don't we just let it go? And she said, Paul, don't buy the beer company. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I will give you a contribution. I will give you the secret of our lemonade that we made in Georgia. I've never divulged it, and it is terrific. So Paul and I spent an evening drinking beer, thinking about this, and we said, okay, Julian, we will not buy the beer company. Give us the formula, which she did. And we brought out that lemonade, and today it is one of our best-selling products. And I think we did all right in the bargain.
Yes.
Because I think Joanne would have never forgiven Oh, it's that. So, anytime anybody wants a good lemonade, there's Loons on Lemonade. I'm not supposed to advertise on this program.
We won't let you advertise. Absolutely. Other questions of any kind? Yes, in the back.
I'm wondering how much his life was influenced by all the wars that has happened in his lifetime, how that maybe made him take another direction, or how it played in his life to go through those.
The question is, how, having lived through these various wars during your life, did war have an impact on how you see the world? What kind of, or on the directions that you took?
What is it that they...
The question is whether, having lived through various wars,
Yes, of course. What had an enormous impact was my adventures in the Second World War, which I wrote about in The Day I Fired at Allen Ladd and other war stories. I had a desire to enlist in some capacity that would lead me to the kind of heroism that I saw in the movies. This is at the very beginning of our entry in the war, 1942. But everything that I applied for, like the Naval Reserve, not the Reserve, Naval, they had a program for college graduates who could go to Naval Officer School. But I passed everything, but would you believe it? Now this is the Navy, and at the last minute, I went with a couple of friends of mine, and we all got okay, and then the captain came out, the captain doctor, and he said, Hotchner, he said, come in here, put your foot up on that stool. And I did. He said, you've got flat feet. I said, oh, well, this is the Navy. He said, doesn't matter, you're rejected, because you're going to be on a destroyer with a steel deck. Your feet are going to break down. So I was rejected. I was rejected when I applied for naval pilot because I didn't have good depth perception. So they said you couldn't land on a... So I went in as a buck-ass private and was sent to Shepherdsfield, Texas. I thought, here I am, thousands of men were in basic training. I got plucked out of the ranks and told that I had to write a musical comedy the way I did at Washington University. On my qualification sheet. I said, a musical comedy? Yep. Where the directive is that proceeds are going to the widows of aviators. So beginning with that, my life in the Air Force was one interesting turn after another. And I think I do write about it at some point. But I was in service for 4 years, and there were 4 very interesting and telling years. Some of it was combat with the Anti-Submarine Command. A lot of it was not combat. It was making a movie, a training movie. was a lot of things that contributed to what I did later on when I got out of the Army, out of the Air Force. I was not in the Army, I was in the Air Force. So, yes, the war did contribute a lot to what happened to me later on.
Any other questions? Yes, and by the way, I was, before, you mentioned 1942, so you graduated from Washington University in law in 1940, if I'm not
That's right.
mistaken.
And I practiced law in St. Louis with a firm called Taylor, Mayer, and Schifrin in the Pine Building. Is there a Pine Building? I think
Pine Building?
No.
Yes, somebody's saying yes. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Well, I think that's where it was.
I never knew that you had practiced law there. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I practiced. They were a firm of very elegant lawyers, and they took me on when I was in my senior year of law school, and then after I passed the bar, I got handed really strange cases that they didn't want to have any part of. And I guess they felt that I would become a very strange lawyer. And I would have been, because I liked everything about the law except having to deal with lawyers.
Might have made you very successful. Yes, you had a question, sir.
My daughter is an undergraduate here now, and my wife and I have tried to explain to her how important we believe you are to the university. And it occurred to us in telling her the stories we know of you that you're a little like Forrest Gump. You seem to have met and been influenced by and come to know everyone there is to know. Has anyone observed that about you before?
I don't know if you could hear the question.
No, I can't really hear it because it's
I'll
too
repeat
far
it.
away from a microphone.
Yes, I'll repeat it. But I won't be able to do it with the questioner's panache. But he said basically he has his daughter is an undergraduate at Washington University, and he keeps telling her how amazed he is at how many people you have been influenced by and who you've gotten to know and over your long life, and mentioned an analogy with Forrest Gump, that you've been everywhere and known everyone. And have you ever been struck by that analogy before?
No.
Good timing on that answer. Never lost it. Yes. Yeah. So what's your next project coming up?
Well,
Do you have?
let me tell you about the bane of a writer. Even at 101, he may have a good story in him, and that a good story still appears in him. It still foments in him. It still may bother him. A promise to 102, and that means every day, in every way, you have to take care of the baby as it grows. And maybe the time has come that I let go, but I do have a thing I'd like to write. But I write it, I had no idea.
You already have another a story basically in mind.
Yep, and I won't let go, but that's all right. I have fun just writing it in the part of me that writes when it writes.
Mm-hmm.
But you never know when it writes and when it'll come out. And that's the fun of being a writer, and I would say that anybody who thinks they have the equipment to be a writer to really try it, because it is an exercise in examining a part of themselves that they'll do in no other way, and a joy that they'll get in no other way, and a disappointment that will come from nasty critics like no other criticism. So it's not for timid people.
No. I think we have one last
Would
question.
he care to share the topic, event, or character at the core of that story in his head?
The question is, would you care to share the topic or event or character of the story in your head?
No, the story you talk about is a story you don't write. That's not me, that's Ernest.
The story you talk about is the story you don't write. That's
right.
Yeah. Wonderful. No, that's a great way, I think, to conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you for not singing Happy Birthday.
We won't sing happy. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, everyone. Don't forget about the birthday book in the back. And please join us for reception and manuscript viewing.
I just want, before everybody leaves, I have a confession to make, and that is that I stole one of the documents on the table there of Hotchner's thing. Yes, I stole it. And it was actually a letter that I wrote Hotch from 1997 after the production of Cafe Universe. And I just want to share with you the few sentences at the end, because I think that they capture the way I was feeling and still feel about him. I said, "You were a great friend, a wonderful playwright, and an extraordinary human being." This was right after directing his play. "You have made Washington University a far greater place than the institution that welcomed you in the late 1930s. You have truly made a difference in so many ways, thanks to your extraordinary artistic career, your personal triumph, and generosity to others. Working on Cafe Universe with you and the students, and dedicating the theater in your honor will always remain one of my most cherished memories." So I thought that was a nice way to... He's really incredible.
Yeah.
He's really incredible.
Stop following.